Good morning, everyone. We are up to Parak Aleph, Mishna Hay, and Mishna Hay begins. Ein tarmin min haleket, min hashikha, umin hapeya, umin hahefker. One cannot take truma from leket, shikha, peya, or from hefker. As we mentioned before, when it comes to separating truma, one separates truma, they have a pile of grain, it's tevel, it's forbidden to eat from until the truma and the meiseris and the tithings are taken. And you need to separate truma for this pile itself. You want to eat from this pile and separate truma from it. You could also, if you have a pile of tevel and another pile of tevel, you can take off truma from one pile for the other pile. Whether you're taking for the pile itself and the other one, just for the other one, doesn't make a difference. You can go ahead and separate truma from one pile for another pile. The Mishna is telling us that there are certain grains that are of a certain status that, although truma has not been separated from them, nonetheless, it's still not tevel to be able to separate truma from it for other grain that does have an obligation of truma on it. So what are the cases? So the first case is that the Mishnah talks about are leket, shikha, and peya. Leket is a din. The Torah says that if certain gleanings fall as you're harvesting, a certain amount of stalks fall at a time, you have to leave them for the poor. That's leket. That's to be gleaned, to be gathered. Then you have shikha, means forgetting. If there are these sheaves or bundles of or piles of grain that are meant to be collected and you forget to collect one, you have to leave that one for the poor. Let's say you have a field and you forget to harvest part of it. You gotta leave that for the poor. That's shikha, from the word shikha, forgetting. And then peya is a din that the Torah is a law that the Torah tells us that typically a corner, but there's a part of the field that you have to leave unharvested for the poor to come take. So these three things, leket, shikha, and peya, what we call matnas aniyim, they are the gifts that we leave for the poor. And the Torah is saying that if you have a farmer who has leket, shikha, and peya in his field, and he now wants to take from that leket, shikha, and peya, he wants to take truma from it for a different pile of grain, the Mishna is saying, ein tarmin, you can't do that. You cannot take from the leket, shikha, and peya that you have in your field, you cannot take from it as truma for another pile of grain that needs truma to be taken from it. And the reason is because since the leket, shikha, and peya are meant to be left for the poor, therefore you cannot go ahead and now use it to separate truma from it for another pile of grain. You can't separate truma from the leket, shikha, and peya because it's meant to be given away. Since it's meant to be given away to the poor, you cannot use it to separate truma from it for other grain, other tevel, these truma to be separated from it. Now, we are going to see that there is a halacha that you cannot separate truma from a pile of grain that either doesn't have an obligation for truma in it anymore or is exempt. And therefore, one has to really just clarify, what exactly is the reason why you cannot separate truma from leket, shikha, and peya? Does one have to actually separate truma from leket, shikha, and peya? That which you're supposed to leave for the poor, is anybody obligated to separate truma from it? The answer is typically not. And if that's the kind of leket, shikha, and peya we're talking about, then we have a reason to say you cannot separate truma from it for a different pile of grain, because any grain that doesn't have an obligation for truma can't be used as truma for something else. So if the leket, shikha, and peya that we're talking about is leket, shikha, and peya that don't have an obligation of truma in it, which is typically the case, then really the reason we can say why you can't separate truma from it is because there is no obligation of truma in this grain. There's no truma here. It's not tevel anymore. It's chulin. It's regular grain. If it doesn't have an obligation for truma anymore, then you can't separate truma from it. So that would be one way of explaining this part of the Mishnah. But there are circumstances where leket, shikha, and peya would, at least midrabanan, according to rabbinic law, have an obligation to separate truma from it. And in that kind of circumstance where there would be some kind of an obligation to separate truma from it, and you want to separate truma from it for another pile of grain, let's say that's also only obligated in truma midrabanan according to rabbinic law, the reason of not being obligated in truma to be the reason why you can't separate truma from it wouldn't be applicable. But there's still the reason that even if there is an obligation of truma here, there's still the reason, ultimately there's still the reason that you can't separate truma from it because it's supposed to give it away to the poor. So either there's really two ways of how we can explain this part of the Mishnah. But at the end of the day, even if there is an obligation of truma in this grain, you still can't separate from this grain for another pile of grain, because this grain, which is lekshik compass, supposed to go to the poor, you're supposed to give it to the poor, not use it for yourself not use it to take care of your obligation of truma. Okay, then we have hefker. Hefker means something ownerless, which means that ownerless grain, produce, it was ownerless. The owner declared it hefker. Anybody can come take it. The halacha is that when you come and you take that grain, even after somebody acquires it, there is no obligation of truma or meiser, the truma to the kohen or the meiser to the Levi from it. That's the halacha by hefker. Hefker is exempt from truma. Now, it's important to know that hefker is only exempt from truma if it became hefker before the processing was done on this grain. The halacha is that the obligation to separate truma from grain only takes place only comes into effect after the grain has been completely processed, which in the case of grain is after it's harvested and it's winnowed, it's threshed, then it's put into a pile, the pile is smoothed out. That is the completion of the processing. That's the point where the obligation of truma takes effect on this grain. That is when it becomes tevel and forbidden to eat from the Torah. Now, if the hefker takes place before the processing is done, and then somebody acquires it, and then they go ahead and finish the processing, no obligation for truma. If the hefker takes place after the processing was done, meaning after the obligation for truma took effect, that's when the owner made it owner. That's when the owner declared it ownerless, hefker, and somebody else came and acquired it. There would be an obligation for truma. The only time hefker is going to be exempt from truma is when the hefker took place before the obligation for truma took effect in this grain. But if it already took effect in the grain, hefker, making it ownerless, won't exempt you from the obligation. So when our Mishnah says you cannot separate from hefker for other grain, it means it was declared hefker. It was declared hefker before the processing was done. You went in and you acquired it. You don't have an obligation to separate truma from this pile of grain because it was hefker before the processing was done, and therefore you cannot separate from this pile that you acquired from hefker. You can't take truma out of it for a different pile that has a obligation for truma on it. Okay, next case. Nor can you separate truma from the first meiser, from the first tithing, that its truma was removed from it. Okay, so here there's a lot of explanation that we need to go through. Number one, as we have to go through the obligation of what is it a person has to separate from their grain before they're allowed to eat from it. So there's truma that goes for the kohen, and the Torah says that comes first out of the grain. After the truma is removed, you have meiser rishon, the first tenth, the first tithing. That goes to the Levi. Meaning what remains from the grain, a tenth of that goes to the Levi, goes to the Levite. A tenth of what remains after that, depending on the year of the Shemitah cycle, it's going to be in the first, second, and third. Now, in the first and second, this meiser shade of the second tithing is sanctified. You have to take it to Yerushalayim to eat, or redeem it onto money, take the money to Yerushalayim and use it on food in Yerushalayim. And in the third year, you have that second tithing is meiser ani. You have to give that tithing to the poor. The fourth and fifth is meiser sheni to Yerushalayim. Sixth is to the poor. Seventh year Shemitah, no trumas and meisers during Shemitah. Okay, so this is what a person has to do. And I mentioned before, the truma is supposed to come first, then the meiser rishon, the meiser sheni. Now, what happens if the Levi comes and gets his Meiser Rishon before the Kohen gets his Truma? So essentially what's happening is like this. The Truma that was supposed to be separated from the grain was not just Truma separated from what's left after Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. It's not what's left after the tithings that Truma is separated for. Truma has to be separated from all the grain, including the amount of grain that's meant to be Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. So we're talking about Meiser Rishon now. So let's say the Meiser Rishon is separated, is taken before the Truma is separated. And that means this Meiser Rishon never had Truma separated from it. The Truma that's supposed to go to the Kohen from the grain itself. That Truma, there was never Truma that was separated to cover it. Besides that, even if Truma was taken first, and then the Levi came and took his Meiser, the Torah obligates the Levi to give a tenth from his tenth to the Kohen. That's called Trumas Meiser. The Truma, the separation for the Kohen, that comes from the Meiser from the tenth that goes to the Levi. So that's always supposed to happen. That's always going to happen. That when a Levi takes his Meiser, he is going to have to go ahead and take a tenth out of that tenth in order to give it to the Kohen. That's his personal obligation. But there was an obligation before on the whole pile of grain that this Meiser Rishon came from. The Truma has to come from it and exempt the Meiser Rishon, the first tithing, from the Truma that's supposed to be coming for, that's supposed to have been separated for it. Which means essentially, when this person takes the Meiser early, when the Levi takes the Meiser early, he has his personal obligation of a tenth of his tenth, called Trumas Meiser to the Kohen, but he's got to separate something for what's called Truma Gedola. The Truma that's supposed to come from the grain itself for the Kohen, the first Truma that was supposed to go for the Kohen. If he wants to eat his grain, theoretically he should need to separate a besides a tenth of his tenth for the Kohen. He's got to set another amount, which is whatever amount that you separate from the Truma that goes to the Kohen at first. He's going to have to separate something of that, at least percentage-wise, for this Meiser that he took. But here's the halacha, and that is, it depends when the Levi took this Meiser Rishon. At what point did he take the Meiser Rishon before Truma was taken here for the Kohen? If he took it before the obligation for Truma took effect, it's hiktim b'shibolim, which means he went ahead and the Levi came and took his Meiser when it was still stalks, wasn't processed. If he took it when it wasn't processed, then we derive from the words of the Torah that grain that he took, that Meiser was taken from, meaning Meiser was taken from the pre-processed grain. Although the Levi, eventually when he finishes processing the grain, he's going to have an obligation to go ahead and separate a tenth from his tenth for the Kohen, but the other Truma that was not taken, the original Truma, the Truma Gedola, the first Truma, that was supposed to be taken from this grain because it wasn't covered by any Truma beforehand, we derive from the Torah, you're exempt. That's what happens. When the Levi proceeds and takes his Meiser before the Kohen gets his Truma, goes out of order. He takes his Meiser before the Truma, but he takes it before the obligation for the Truma took effect in this grain. At the end, he will only be obligated to give the Trumas Meiser a tenth of the tenth and not the other Truma. That's what the Torah decrees. However, if the Meiser was separated after the processing was completed, after the obligation for Truma took effect in this grain, and the fact that he went ahead and he took the Meiser before the Truma isn't going to exempt his Meiser, his tithing, from Truma. He'll have to separate his Trumas Meiser, he'll have to separate the tenth of a tenth from his grain, plus cover whatever needs to be covered for his grain of Truma. From the first Truma, the Truma Gedola, that's to go to that goes to the Kohen, that was supposed to go to the Kohen originally from the pile. He's going to have to do both. So it all depends at what point of time the Levi gets his Meiser before the Kohen took his Truma, meaning he went out of order. Now, our Mishna says that you cannot separate Truma from Meiser Rishon that its Truma was taken from. What that means, the words itself mean, if you have the Meiser, Levi has his Meiser Rishon, and the tenth of his tenth, the Trumas Meiser, that was supposed to go to the Kohen, was removed, then you cannot separate from this Meiser Rishon Truma for a different pile of grain that Truma has to be taken from. Which implies that if you didn't do that, if you didn't separate the Trumas Meiser yet, then you would be able to take from this 10th that you have, because it's tevel still, and separate from it Truma for another pile of grain that the Truma needs to be taken from, because there is still an obligation of Truma here. It's still tevel. Okay. Now, but if the Truma was already taken, the Trumas Meiser was taken, then what I have here is grain. It's the Meiser that goes to the Levi. There's no obligation of Truma on it. You can't separate from a pile of grain that doesn't have any kind of obligation of Truma on it for another pile that does have obligation of Truma. The same thing would apply. Okay, now, if we're talking about, so that would be, let's say, a regular case. The Truma was taken from the grain first, then the Levi came and took his Meiser. If there's still Trumas Meiser, a tenth of a tenth in this Meiser, he could actually now decide to take his Meiser and turn it into Truma, or whatever amount he wants to turn it to Truma for another pile of grain, and it would work. It would be fine. It would, if he didn't take it out yet, it would work. If once he did take it out, it wouldn't work. Let's say the Levi comes and takes the Meiser early, takes it before the Truma. So he said, if he takes it from the pre-processed grain, then he doesn't have to cover the Truma Gedai, doesn't have to cover the Truma that was supposed to go to the Kohen originally from this grain. But if he didn't separate Trumas Meiser from this grain yet, which he has to do no matter what, okay, if he didn't do it yet, then he can go ahead and separate Truma from here, from this pile of grain, for a different pile that Truma needs to be taken from. And if, let's say, but if he did already separate the Trumas Meiser, the 10th of a 10th, then he couldn't do anything anymore. And if, let's say, the Levi came and took his Meiser early, but it was after the processing of the grain was completed, it was after the Truma took effect in this grain. So then at the end of the day, even if he separated Trumas Meiser, a 10th of a 10th, but if he didn't separate the original Truma, which he has to do now because he took it after the processing was completed, as long as there's some kind of obligation of Truma in this grain, then this grain is tevel. And if it's tevel, you can now go, it's tevel to Truma. You can now separate from this grain from another pile that needs Truma to be taken from it. So depending on the scenario, that is going to make a difference as to whether you're going to go ahead and separate, whether you could separate Truma from this 10th that went to the Levi or not. Now, the wording of our Mishnah is, you cannot separate from Meiser Rishon that its Truma was separated from it. The wording of that means you have the Meiser Rishon, its Truma, the 10th of a 10th was taken from it. You can't go ahead and separate Truma. What about the other Truma? What case are we talking about? So the Bartunura says is that we are talking about the case where the Levi went and he came early, right? He took his Meiser before the Kohen took his Truma. He took it before the processing was completed, where we say the Truma, he has no obligation of the Truma Gedolah, the original Truma that's supposed to go to the Kohen. That's the specific case of our Mishnah. And on that specific case where the Mishnah says you don't have to give the Truma Gedolah, you don't have to give the original Truma, you don't have to cover the original Truma for this Meiser, for this tithing, because it was taken before the processing of the grain was completed. If the 10th of a 10th of Trumas Meiser was taken from it, then the halacha is that you cannot separate Truma from it anymore. If it wasn't taken from it, then you could. And what really comes out here is that the point of the Mishnah, the Chiddush, the novelty that the Mishnah is really teaching us here, is not so much about whether you could take the Truma from it from a different pile, as much as bringing out this idea that once that in a pile of grain that the Levi took as Meiser before the processing was completed, for Truma to take effect in this grain, he took the Meiser early. And we say on that you are exempt from the Truma Gedolah, from the original Truma. That's the real point. That's the real point of the Mishnah here. The real Chiddush, the novelty of the Mishnah here, what the Mishnah is really coming to teach us new here, is this halacha. It's kind of it's an indirect way of doing it, but that's how the commentaries say that's happening here. The point of the Mishnah is really to teach us that the Truma Gedoyla in this case, where the Levi took the Meiser before the processing was completed, the fact that he's exempt from it, that's the point of the Mishnah here. Because the Mishnah says once its Truma was taken, meaning once the Truma's Meiser, the 10th of a 10th was taken, you can't separate anything anymore. You can't separate Truma from this Meiser for another pile of grain that needs Truma to be taken from it. Why not? Isn't there still another Truma obligation? If we're talking about a regular case, just a simple case, a regular case of the Levi took his Meiser in line, and he separated Truma's Meiser, and therefore it's completely exempt from Truma. There's no novelty to that. But there's an indirect novelty if we talk about a case where we might have thought that there should be Truma here, and there's not. Would there have been Truma here? You could have separated from this pile for a different pile that needs Truma to be taken from it. But now that the Mishnah teaches us there is no Truma here, you now learn something new. And therefore the case of the Mishnah is where the Meiser here that we say, Meiser Rishon, the first Meiser, meaning it goes to the Levi, that its Truma was taken from it, the Truma's Meiser was taken from it. You cannot now separate Truma from it for something else. That case is, we want you to teach us something new. There's a case like this that's not so simple that nonetheless we still say that there is no Truma here. And that's the case where the Levi took his Meiser before the Kohen took his Truma, before the grain was finished being processed. And that there we say, once you take the Truma's Meiser, there is no more Truma obligation here. Because even though Truma Gedoyla wasn't taken for this Meiser, because you took the Meiser before the original Truma was taken for the Kohen, since you took it before the processing was completed, that obligation of Truma is gone. And therefore, once you separate the Truma's Meiser from it, the 10th of a 10th that the Levi has to give from his 10th to the Kohen, once that's done, and that has to be done even if he took it early, even if he took it before the processing was done, once that's done, no more obligation for Truma here. You can't separate from it for other grain. So what I laid out here in length were the different scenarios of this halacha, the different scenarios of halacha about when the Levi takes his Meiser before the Kohen takes his Truma. But the specific case of the Mishnah was the case where he took his Meiser before the processing was done, to let us know indirectly that there is an obligation of Truma's Meiser of the Levi to take a 10th from his 10th give to the Kohen, but the original Truma that should have been taken from the pile at first, that was supposed to cover the Meiser Rishon too, supposed to exempt the Meiser Rishon too from Truma, from the obligation of Truma, that's supposed to come from everything in this pile. That is not applicable where the Meiser Rishon was taken before the processing was complete. Okay, that will be enough for today for the Mishnah. We'll continue this tomorrow, finish up the Mishnah tomorrow, or we'll continue the Mishnah tomorrow. Plenty more what to talk about in this Mishnah. Let's now do the Sefer Mitzvahs. Mitzvahs leisasher lemanis dayan she'enei hagan. Prohibition against appointing a judge that is not fit for the job. Shenemar, as it says, lo sakira panim b'mishpat. Literally translated, this verse means you shall not show honor in judgment, which in one level means that, if there's an honorable person who comes before the judge can't decide to judge in his favor out of his honor. But it actually means something else. The Parish Sefer, the Sefer says, this is really going on a person who's appointed. His job is to appoint judges. That he should not do it out of respect. And it shouldn't say, Ish Pliny Gibor, this guy, he's strong. Aynoya, he's handsome. Or he's very knowledgeable in other types of knowledge. Or any other kind of quality, positive quality. Do not relate to the subject of Torah knowledge or being God-fearing. A judge has to be wise in Torah. So I don't know if he has to be wise in Torah. That's what he has to be wise in to be a judge in a rabbinical court. Pirei Shemaim has to be God-fearing too. The Soinei Betza, he despises money. He's not going to take any kind of bribes. The Kaivesh Yitzray, and he controls his evil inclination. He controls himself. He keeps himself under control. The Yolev Amitz, and he should have the strength and the courage. Lahatzel Oshik Miyad Oshkai, to save someone who's being cheated, who's being wronged. These are the qualities needed to be a judge. not about being good looking, not about being strong, not about being knowledgeable in other worldly matters. Being knowledgeable in other worldly matters definitely helps for a judge, but that can't be the primary reason to give him the position. The primary reason given to the position has to be that he's knowledgeable in Torah, he's God-fearing, and he's going to do what's right. But someone who appoints a judge based on the other qualities, transgresses this prohibition. Like secure upon him the Mishna, do not show respect in judgment, means don't appoint a judge out of respect for him. This applies in all places at all times. Have a great day.